right, here we are. This is like the most underwhelming start time because my son has my iPad, and that's where I usually play music from. But
Ah,
in preparation for his schooling, I won't interrupt that. But Maggie, welcome, welcome, welcome.
hello.
Excellent. And we've got if you're here in the chat, just drop us a hello. If this is your first Open Source Friday, I would love to know. If you've come by for on the GitHub Twitch stream for any other streams, yeah, let us know what streams brought you here originally. Be great to hear. So it looks like Python with the Q. I can read through that. But yeah, excellent. Welcome, welcome through. Actually, I haven't seen you around Python. I love these names. Twitch names are challenging because some of them you can't actually you can't pronounce out loud. But Python, I gotcha. I got you, Python. And that's the last time I'll say I got you, Python. I literally was actually just trying to do Python a couple days ago. But yeah, this is Open Source Friday. Welcome. I'm BWO. BWO on Twitch. I hear and support live streaming on the GitHub profile on Twitch. Where do Open Source Fridays, and we talk to maintainers, contributors, people involved in open source about how to do open source, how to get involved, and hopefully we can cover a bit of the story of even how Maggie got involved in open source. So, Maggie, if you don't mind, do you want to say hello?
Sure. Hello to streaming people. Should I make a basic introduction of myself?
Yeah, yeah. Just tell us
Okay.
basically what you
Okay.
do and why you're here.
Sure. So, I'm Maggie Johnson Pint. In my day job life, I am the product management lead for the Azure SDKs. So when you use a client library to connect to Azure, my team makes that, and we think a lot about idiomatic code for developers who want to access the cloud. In open source life, I am a maintainer of the Moment.js library in JavaScript for DateTime. And then I also work with ECMA tc39, which is the standards committee that makes the JavaScript programming language itself. And we are working on making brand new DateTime APIs built right into the JavaScript programming language so that you don't have to keep installing very large libraries to do this. And I think that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I'm excited about this because I've been doing JavaScript for quite some time. I'm not like an old JavaScript head, but I've been doing it since like almost before ES6, a couple years before that.
Okay.
So I didn't go through all the sort of back and forth. Actually, my introduction to JavaScript is actually IOJS around that time. So
Yep.
I'm sure you remember, and maybe somebody in the some people in the chat too remember those times. But that was my introduction. Like I had no idea what was going on with this, like the difference in specifically in Node. So Node had a split in the community. IOJS was implementing, I think, cutting edge features from ES6, and I think they figured it out and they merged together, and now we have Node. And we have now a foundation. I don't know if I got all those cliff notes correct.
That's about right.
Okay.
That's about the IO story, yeah.
Excellent. And then tc39 is so there's an Openjs Foundation, and those are the individuals who how would you explain the difference between tc39 and the Openjs Foundation?
So those are separate entities.
Yes.
So wow, we make complicated things on the web. So for starters, the Openjs Foundation is a foundation that supports open source projects in the JavaScript ecosystem that are critical to keeping us coding as JavaScript developers. And the role of a foundation, if you aren't familiar with foundations in open source, is that they're really there. And it's funny because when you're just like a dev on the day-to-day, this is something that probably doesn't flag for you unless you work in a large corporate environment where someone cares a lot. But open source projects, they actually need lawyers. They need marketing teams. They need kind of like weird business things. The lawyers is actually a really big one to make sure that you're in licensing compliance, and security professionals to make sure that everything is secure. And the role of a foundation is to provide support in that way to make sure that there's a sustainable story for the library from an intellectual property standpoint, from a security standpoint, to provide that guarantee that someone will be there for that project. So the Openjs Foundation stewards a lot of projects that are critical path in the JavaScript ecosystem to make sure that those kinds of assurances are in place. That includes Node.js. That also includes Moment.js that I work on. One benefit that the Openjs Foundation provides is that it also provides a membership to ECMA, which is the standards body, which is a different entity that governs the JavaScript programming language. And standards bodies are interesting. Fundamentally, ECMA is not an open source entity. For you to participate in an ECMA-driven standard, you have to belong to an ECMA member company. So companies actually pay into ECMA to have a membership, and then that standards body administrates ECMA. So the way that the relationship between the Openjs Foundation and ECMA is that the Openjs Foundation is an ECMA member. And what that does is it allows our project maintainers for most of our critical path projects in the ecosystem to have a say on the direction of the JavaScript programming language, no matter where they work. I will call out my employer, Microsoft, is also an ECMA member, so like I'm sort of good either way. But to be a delegate to the standards body, to have a place in standards to voice your opinion, you have to be coming through a member. Now, it's interesting with tc39. I would say that the members of tc39, so Technical Committee 39, is the steering committee that actually makes the JavaScript programming language. And I have to say we're like a little bit of a thorn in the ECMA organization's side, because we are like open source people to the core. And so when people are like, well, to contribute to the JavaScript programming language, you must belong to a member company and this and that, we're like, how do we get around these rules? Like what are the loopholes in your law? We want to have a great relationship with ECMA. I don't want to create controversy here. We've actually been extremely grateful to them for them helping us find ways so that we do have a community contributor story for the JavaScript programming language that complies with their guidelines, keeps them moving, and also really allows people to get involved. So we've loved that relationship with ECMA, that they have wanted to be progressive in that way. And let us get a community voice into web standards.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I didn't understand the relationship, because my introduction to all this, and even to you, is through the Openjs Foundation. And they have Openjs office hours, I think either once or twice a week. So that was like my first introduction to actually talking to folks within that community. So I just assumed that like they weren't the same or on tc39. I didn't even know that correlation. I just thought it was a bunch of people who were trying to drive projects and the greater good for the JavaScript side of the community interactions, and not specifically the language itself.
Yeah, it is a little opaque, but yes, to be a delegate to tc39, you have to be part of a member company. And some people do come in through the projects and Openjs Foundation's membership. For quite some time, I was the Openjs Foundation delegate. Now I switch between being a Microsoft delegate and an Openjs Foundation delegate. And Leo Balter in the past has been the Openjs Foundation delegate. So a few people from various projects. I come from Moment. Leo came from QUnit. Have been delegates of the foundation, and our role there is to provide a voice for the community to ECMA. And like I said, it's been a good evolution of working relationship, to have ECMA allow us to bring so much of this out into the open, so that we do have a contributor story. If you want to change JavaScript as a language, you can do that. So we're grateful for that, and that's been a journey for the past couple.
Excellent. And yeah, I see the note about the background noise. I think that's actually coming on from my mixer, and I am quite unsure of what the deal is there. Well, I just turned myself down completely. Actually, Python, can you hear my voice? Is that... Well, Maggie, you can hear my voice.
Yeah, I can totally hear you.
Can you hear background noise as well? Is like a hum or a yeah? The only thing I could think to do is remove some mids.
I can hear my own mini fridge. I took off the headset to make sure that's what it was.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll just have to roll through the background noise. Because I can see the levels where the background noise is coming through, but I don't actually have headphones connected to my mixer because those are the ones I have in my ear connected to the computer. So, unfortunately, we'll have to power through. So, apologies on that, Python. But I did want to. We can switch gears, and I appreciate that background too around tc39 Openjs and sort of how things are made. I originally reached out to you specifically about Moment because you were associated with the Moment project. And you actually informed me of some pretty good knowledge about Moment, and specifically just the Moment.js library. Now, I personally have used Moment a long time, but I've sort of dropped down in my usage, and have used some other third-party projects to handle date time and manipulation. So, do you want to give us like a quick update to Moment, and then what is happening with tc39 and the temporal
Yep,
stuff?
totally. So, um, the first thing I'll say about Moment is that anybody who's a user knows that it's a very old library. We go back nearly as far as jQuery in this ecosystem, and we Moment first of all has a very small maintainer team. There's only about 5 of us. We're all very part time. Um, Iskren, who's been with it since practically the beginning, is the longest standing of us. Um, and it's one thing that we really understand about Moment is that it provides a critical part of the JavaScript ecosystem for millions of projects. Um, and that gets us in an interesting situation when we look at sort of the evolution of JavaScript development and the evolution of the web over time. Um, Moment is designed for like a different web, like a fundamentally different time. And we've done as best we can to sort of pull it forward, be kind to users, try to make a clear migration path. But the reality is that we get lots of requests. We're like, well, your bundle size is huge, and it doesn't module load, and it's mutable, and we want a mutable because we're using React. We get all these requests, and the reality is, at the end of the day, for us to kind of bring it to that modern web space would just be painful for the millions of projects that are currently relying on it, um, and painful for us to create that migration story. And this started becoming apparent to us that like Moment was just like, you can't stop serving the number of people who depend on it. That would be unfair, but it was just like not going to be able to keep up with this modern web story. And as a maintainer team, we took a regroup and we made 2 decisions. I think everybody is completely bought into both decisions. One decision that we made was to ship a library called Luxon. I don't know if you've ever used Luxon.
No.
So Luxon, yep, that is it. Luxon is, for lack of a better way to put it, made by Moment. It's made by Isaac, who's one of our maintainers. He started building this because he got so frustrated with trying to work around all the complexities of Moment and the legacy code base and then what people wanted for the modern web. And he's like, I'll just rebuild. So he built this as a side project, and he kept hopping, and we have a Slack chat. He kept hopping in the Slack chat and be like, what do you think of this API? What do you think of this API? What do you think of this API? And one day we sort of turned around and we said, like, Moment's going to be what it is. It's loved. We understand that it's dependent upon by a lot of people, but it's going to be what it is. And Luxon, this is the project for the modern web. Like, Isaac always called it a toy, and we're like, dude, you're done. Like, ship it. And so our sort of blessed immediate path for DateTime users is to look at Luxon. This does, carry the sum total of our knowledge of the pain of DateTime APIs. The other decision that we made, which I took point on, was we really said to ourselves, there are problems related to handling DateTime in JavaScript that they're just not going to be solved in the library space, in the user space. And this is because certain things, especially localization and time zone data, they got to be exposed by the operating system. You can't bundle that stuff and put it in the browser. That's why Moment's gigantic. Even if you're just pulling a couple locales or a couple of time zones, the size explosion is really wild.
Yeah.
So we made the second decision to take the path that I took and approach ECMA tc39 and the web standard to talk about building a new set of datetime APIs into the language itself.
And
And
that's the proposal that we're
that is
looking at
this
here.
proposal. Yep.
Interesting.
um, yep.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like so my background is I do Ruby and I see Python. Python in the chat is actually he's saying that you're a real keeper, Maggie. You're a true maintainer. I don't know if that was in reference because you go back and forth from the delegates on both teams, Openjs and Microsoft. But so like what I was getting at is like things like Python and Ruby, they have really good basic APIs for manipulating things like datetime.
Yep.
But with JavaScript, it's kind of hit or miss when you try to do things like time zones and try to figure out how to read these like information. I think that's where Moment really comes into. I think a lot of people's foresight and like this sort of part of their DNA when it comes to manipulating datetime. It's like I'm just going to grab Moment because it's going to give me the actually things like this 8 days ago. Like that was my
probably is Moment.
it probably is Moment or a Moment inspired library. But like this is something that was popped into so many projects. I think the first time I saw this was in Foursquare, personally, like seeing it in the wild. But you'd be able to see like someone checked in 10 seconds ago, someone committed 3 days ago, 8 days ago. Like if anybody's not really familiar with Moment or things like this and these datetime manipulations, out of the box, these are like the most basic interactions, but you can do so much more with it. But yeah, go ahead about this proposal-temporal and how it's sort of you're proposing for it to be in the actual standard library itself.
Yep. So this is proposing to bring all of these APIs into the JavaScript standard library so that we're no longer in library land. And it's interesting. When I first brought this proposal, I really knew nothing about web standards. And I actually, the way that I even ended up bringing a proposal to tc39 is I had just joined Microsoft. And I found out that Microsoft, which makes sense because we make a browser, had a rep to tc39. And I got through the grapevine, like, you should go talk to this guy, Brian Turleson, who reps us to tc39. He knows the dates are bad. And I like found Brian, like it's a big corporation, I like found him through a person of a person. And I said, I maintain Moment and really this needs to go into the programming language and we know this to be true. And like, would you fix JavaScript? Basically, I said, would you fix JavaScript? And he was like, no, you're going to do it. And I was like, okay. And it was Brian ultimately who got me to my first tc39 meeting and basically kind of put me out there in front of everyone and was like, Maggie's going to help us fix the dates. And the really interesting thing about it is that datetime as a subspace is actually super specialized. It's not that you happen to know a lot about language parsers, like language parsing behavior or something like that, really doesn't help you in this subdomain. And actually, the delegates of tc39 sort of were like, we don't have the domain expertise. Thanks for being here. Which was a very interesting experience. And so they basically said to me, well, what do we have to make? And we ended up coming up with this proposal-temporal. I don't know. I feel like it's worth talking a little bit about the general proposal process in tc39.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, just for the sake of the listener.
Sure. Why don't you go to github.com/tc39/proposals.
Proposals. Oh, I guess I could have just did this. There we go.
There you go. Okay, so whenever you want to make a change to JavaScript, First, keep in mind that JavaScript at the end of the day is a standard. It's a spec. And it's like written in like spec text, right? It's written in this like very specific spec language. We could look at that too. If you just Google like ECMA 262, it'll pop the spec up, but we don't have to, but we could.
Yeah.
And to make a change to JavaScript, what you're really doing is you're saying, I am requesting a change to the spec text, right? Like you're making a pull request against the spec. And JavaScript is actually very unique in that the implementers, that's the people who make the JavaScript engines, V8, etc., they're following the spec. The spec happens first, and then stuff goes out into the world. So over time, JavaScript has become this like most popular programming language on earth, and we've had to evolve this really robust process around how to get a spec change. So what you'll see is we have a 4-stage process for getting a spec change. And ultimately, the stages kind of progress like this. When you first have an idea for how you would like something in JavaScript to be different, you actually make a proposal that we call it stage 0, which means that you have a GitHub repository and it maybe has some like sample hypothetical code. And with a stage 0 proposal, what you're doing is you're putting it out there and you're going to the tc39 delegates and saying that this proposal exists. And then to get that proposal to move forward, you have to go and present to this standards committee that meets every other month. And this is where the rules still are that you can't present unless you're a delegate. And we have that whole delegate relationship where you have to work for a member company or go through OpenJSF. But if you are a delegate, then you come in front of this committee and you present your change idea. And in this stage 0 phase, it's very much an idea. It's not like the code that you're putting up there, the sample code that you're putting up there is ultimately what's going to land in the language. I don't think a proposal has ever stayed the same from stage 0 to stage 4. That would just be impossible. So you put up the stage 0 proposal, and the first thing that the committee is deciding is, do we want to make this kind of change to JavaScript? Like the general idea. And if they feel like the general idea is good, they'll pull you into this stage 1. Where did the stage 1 proposals go?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask because I see I see stage
Scroll up.
3.
Yeah, we got stage 3.
Oh.
Oh, there's stage 1s, stage 0 and stage 1s.
Oh,
so stage 0.
They got stage 0 and stage 1s get pushed into its own markdown.
There's tons of them.
Interesting.
There's tons of them. But I would say that Let's Make DateTime Better was accepted quite readily by tc39 as something that they knew was a problem in the language, and we moved to stage 1. Now, to get from stage 1 to stage 2 is one of the initial pretty difficult steps. To get into stage 2, you had to come up with what we call initial spec text. And like I said, spec text is like code as words.
Yeah, this is the 262 that you mentioned earlier, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, this is text in the 262 spec.
Yeah, for anybody who's watching and listening, tc39. And the beauty of this is that all this is available on GitHub and not in like a weird IRC channel.
So that's the test code for the spec.
Oh, test code.
Spec.
Okay.
Just Google ECMA 262 and you'll get a rendered spec.
Which one do I click on?
Take the first one, should be the rendered spec.
Okay. Yep. Interesting. Okay, got it.
You get a PDF. Go ahead, open, or the browsable HTML, either one.
Yeah. PDFs are safe.
PDF's open. So if we just kind of scroll down here, we'll get an idea of what spec text looks like. Yeah, pick anything. So this is big int, remainder behavior. And if you look at it, it is, as you can see, almost like code as words.
Yeah.
That big int add, that it's labeled an abstract operation. That means that it's an operation that isn't exposed to the user, but hypothetically exists in the spec to illustrate other things.
Fascinating. Yeah, this kind of reads like a college course I took but got a C in.
Yep. But to go to stage 2, you have to bring an initial spec for the API. Now, starting at stage 2, this is where the community contribution story really starts to become something that people can participate in a big way.
Yeah.
Once we have that initial spec text, we're always going to start going after making a polyfill so that people can try actually using the API. And we're going to have a huge amount of discussion going on about, like, is this the right API?
Yeah.
Most APIs.
Can you explain a polyfill real quick?
Yeah, so a polyfill is some userland JavaScript code that emulates the behavior of what would ultimately be in the language. So in basically it's a library. Basically it's a library that does what the proposal would do. And we want to have parity between the behavior of that library and the spec text that we wrote.
Gotcha.
And yeah, the minute that Polyfill starts to come into existence, this is where our community contribution story gets really great. Because what usually happens is we put out some we call it like strawman code. If you go back to the temporal proposal tab, we can dig into that proposal.
Yes. Oh no, that's Luxon. Where do we? Oh, over here.
There you go.
Gotcha.
Scroll down a little bit. Let's see. What do we have in here? We've been changing the README file. Originally, this README file was just like some APIs that I had made up out of my head. What happens is we need to get those working. So we end up writing this spec text, and then we write a polyfill, which is a JavaScript library like any other.
Yeah.
And on the polyfill, we'll take contributions from anybody. So this contribution story is really not any different than if you wanted to contribute to Moment or you wanted to contribute to, any other library in the ecosystem.
That's fascinating too, because there are certain things that came in through stage. So one, I think someone explained to me the stages, and for whatever reason, I always thought stage 0 would have been like that's when we're almost ready. But stage 0, I guess, is not so much because that's going to be like I guess arrays, maybe the 0-based arrays, and that being the first step. But anyway, sorry, I'm just talking out loud at this point.
Oh, it's all good.
But I think that explanation helps, and to know that stage 2 and 3 are places that people can sort of keep an eye on.
Yes. Stage 2 is the big API movement phase. When something goes to stage 3, what's happening at stage 3 is that we're asking an engine to actually write the code and ship it into the world to see how it goes. So when something goes into stage 3, we got to be pretty happy with that API.
Yeah.
So this stage 2 time, so temporal's actually been sitting in stage 2 for almost 2 years. And for a very big API like this, that's not unusual. Once it goes to 3, it's pretty baked, right? Like then we've got browser engines shipping it out. And to get to stage 4, we need to have 2 shipping implementations that the browser vendors are happy with, or the Node vendors. I keep saying browser. We love Node. We need to have 2 shipping implementations that the engines are happy with.
Okay.
So stage 3 is really about what we typically see at stage 3 are concerns around like sometimes you implement something and like it's just not gonna perform.
Yeah. And when you say engines, are you talking like V8?
Yep.
Okay, excellent.
Yep. I'm talking about the language engines. Stage 3 is really for testing in the language engines. And then once we're happy with that, we go to stage 4, and that means done. So the best time to get involved with a proposal is in stage 1, but especially stage 2, because that's when we've said we're doing this, we like the initial idea, and stage 2 is when we really want your feedback. One thing I will say about any of the stage 2 proposals, the delegates of tc39 as a committee are kind of acutely aware of the fact that we sometimes don't capture what the new to JavaScript user would understand. Like, we're very deep in. And we also understand that JavaScript is like practically the starter programming language of the world right now. Like,
Yeah.
how many people started with JavaScript?
Yeah. Very common.
Yeah. So at stage 2, we really value the person who's willing to come to the table and say, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Um, like, we seek it out. Um, you heard me mention that I'm a manager, and like I often by the committee get sent back to work. Like, can you have your college hire employees try this API for me, Maggie?
Yeah, that's fascinating too, because I sat in a meeting. The first time I met you was in the the Node Summit meeting
Yep.
about contributors, and I'm a big fan of actually getting feedback from folks who are new to even open source and contributing, because they always have really good questions. And I'm roughly like 7 years into this, like full time engineering, so like though I feel very beginner, like I still do a lot of beginner mistakes. I still also don't know what it's like to be day one beginner. And
Right.
for something like like with your example, which is the proposal for temporal, like just manipulating date time and leveraging this instead of grabbing a moment or grabbing something else, is pretty like it doesn't sound like low effort, but if you're already working on something that has something that's manipulating date time, it seems like it's something that if someone knew about it, they could attempt to build a project around it and then provide feedback. But I don't
Totally.
think I think the context, and what I love about doing these Friday events is that we can provide that context for folks and say, hey, like next time you do some date time stuff, why don't you try manipulating it in this library, this Polyfill, and report back if it works. If there's things that are, I guess, edge cases and corner cases that are not working,
Yep.
that would be super valuable. So, knowing the stages and knowing this proposal system, I'm curious, like, did you want to go switch over to VS Code and show this use case?
Sure. Well, so let's really quick while we're on GitHub.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how you get this proposal to use. So if you go to the Polyfill link on the README, it's also just a Polyfill folder. Either one.
Oh. Okay. Well.
There we go.
There we go.
Here we go. This is, like I said, this is just a JavaScript library.
Yeah.
This is not any different than any other JavaScript library that you might contribute to. We've got all of our types enumerated out here. And we have got the test code in another folder. I mean, this is standard JavaScript.
Yeah, this is pretty readable too as well. Like there's no there's no TypeScript here, so everybody who doesn't do TypeScript, it's pretty approachable.
Yep.
And yeah, actually I want to take a look at the test. You said there's a test folder?
Yeah.
Curious, like some date time test, because that's the thing I'm most interested in. To absolute date. Time zones. Yeah, time zones is something that I always avoid with a passion.
Well, but when you need them, you need them.
Yeah. So, yeah, I want to. I'll save my comment because I have an actual example where I think I'm going to use this today. And
Okay.
now that I know how the polyfill works and we've had this conversation, but I'll save it for the end.
Sure.
So that way we can focus on how people can get involved in this project.
Yep. So if you go back, there's a very nice cookbook that they've written. So this tells you, this is an npm install just like any other library that you work with, and here's how you import the code. And then there should be a link to the cookbook if you scroll up.
Do you know about this npm run playground? If not, or is that just in the package.json?
Yeah, that's just in the package.
I didn't know if that was something special. It just runs the experimental flags. Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
That's a good naming. It just made me think there was like some sort of secret feature in npm I didn't know about.
No. Where's the...
You looking for the cookbook?
Yeah, that's basically the docs. Yeah,
All right.
right there. This is really helpful. This is going to give you a lot of information about how to make API calls, how the type system breaks out, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems To me, it seems straightforward. Hopefully, the listeners are also catching up and understanding how this works. But yeah, if you're including the library and you call it you name it temporal, like you should be able to do temporal.now,
Yep.
and then temporal.now.
Exactly.
So like normally, what I would do um, is actually I don't have a terminal open. I closed it, but I would just do datetime.now and then datetime.now other things. But there's extra work to do to make it the way I want it. So I guess the hope is that the temporal library is going to be an easy API to not only like grep with your mind or grok with your mind, um, but also I guess easy to manipulate and that you don't have to install. And I guess when it gets to stage 3 and 4, you don't have to install a third-party library to get it to work.
Yeah, at the bottom of this, do we have the type graphic? Yeah. Ooh, yes. This, if you're talking about how this library works, this is interesting. A really big concept in datetime and programming is whether you have a relationship to UTC, like you know at what point in UTC you're at or not. And the way that this API breaks out is that absolute type over on the left is the point in UTC. You can think of it as a Unix timestamp. And then the types on the right, the date, time, year, month, and month, day, they are types without any relationship to UTC, which is a really common use case. I want to show the time at midnight wherever I am. And then this time zone type allows you to, if you know a time zone, create mappings between absolute and the calendar types on the right. And that's a lot of the paradigm going on in this API. So it is a little bit of a thinking API. It causes you to have to ask yourself, right now with the code that I have, do I understand the relationship to UTC? Do I only understand the time in local time?
Yeah.
Do I understand the time in local time in the time zone? So it's composable in that way.
Okay. Excellent. I'm excited to actually use it in my project. Now that I understand the whole where it's at and sort of the place. Understanding, like, honestly, I didn't know that when people use the word polyfill, I sort of always glazed over. And I'm like, again, I'm 7 years into using JavaScript professionally.
Sure.
I just gloss over and I'm like, oh yeah, polyfill. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I never actually knew it just really meant, yeah, there's
Yeah.
a npm package you can install.
The one thing I will call out about the polyfill is that until this hits stage 3, this API is very unstable.
Yeah.
So you may not want to put it in your production project.
Oh yeah, I definitely I'd highly recommend not do that. The project I have in mind is actually a side project, not even a side project. It's an example project I use.
Totally.
So basically, the project I have, and I'll just mention it briefly. It's a project that I use with my GitHub actions to tell me the week number, because I build a bunch of GitHub actions, and I append the week number in the response, because I want to create an issue on a cadence. So I create the week number because I know this issue, every week I open up an issue to basically present information and collect information from people on my team. So this is a very trivial use case. I did not have to build an npm package to make it run, but that's what this is. And I built it originally to do another workshop on Node. So
Okay.
it just sort of sits around as like a little side thing that's only like 12 lines of code. So
is this just like a monotonic ordering of week numbers up, or are you
no,
talking about
it's
the ISO week?
yeah. So honestly, it's been so long, but yeah, I get the date, and then base it on UTC, and then I count out. Yeah.
Okay. I think in temporal, just so you know, so the guys have been, for the last couple of months, I have had other stuff going on in my life, and a whole bunch of the guys have been changing APIs on me, so I'm like, okay, hello, new APIs. But I think you can get an ISO week number directly out of the API right now.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, that's all I want. Like
Yeah.
these 13 lines is probably way too much to do what I'm doing it for. And though, yes, I'm using it in production, it's a production into my own team's repo. So it's like, if it breaks, it really doesn't matter. We just manually open the issue whenever it does break. But it's a nice little... I like these little sandbox environments for me to sort of play around with, for reasons like this. Like, I want to try out the temporal stuff.
Yep.
And this, it won't... Hopefully, it will work in the way I want it, and I can actually provide feedback
Yeah,
on the
absolutely.
project itself. So
Absolutely. Um, are
so
we gonna go to sample code? Is that what we're gonna try out? Or?
yeah, we probably should. We got roughly like about 20 minutes. So you've been so gracious and created some examples for us. So folks, did you want to drop in the? Oh, you don't have. Do you have the Twitch chat open?
Yeah, I dropped the gist in the chat. Well, in the Zoom chat.
Okay.
I don't know which chat. You can move it to any chat you like.
Oh, thanks. You're too kind. So I'll grab that gist, and then for the sake of anybody who wants to follow along, just grab this gist, and you can essentially it's just like paint by numbers. So paint by comments.
Yep, this is paint by comments. So this first code we have here is our old date object. And if you want to, basically what I'm doing here is I'm parsing the string January 1st, 2020. Oh, well, yeah. So we have the imports.
Yeah.
And then I'm parsing the string January 1st, 2020 here. And if you just want to kick that code off, Brian, it'll illustrate some interesting behaviors of the date object as it exists today. So you see the first console.log is to isostring, and and you see that it parsed that date as a UTC date.
Yes.
So then when you call isostring, you get UTC out.
Yep.
But when you call regular old toString, you get December.
Yeah, which is what I normally want. I usually want this when I print out stuff.
Right. And so this is a common gotcha for date. Like I think everybody's had this happen. You know, one thing to know about that parsing behavior in date is that it's actually the specification text for how date should parse in JavaScript is in conflict with the specification text for ISO 8601, which is what that date standard that we all use in computing is. So it actually doesn't parse the way that it's supposed to. And it also varies across engines some of the edge cases of the parsing behavior. So it parsed that string as UTC, but if you were to add a time to it, it would parse it as local time, which is just confusing as heck. So it's a little wild the way that this works. And that's definitely something we wanted to clean up. So if you scroll down, you can comment that code out, and we can go and uncomment the next couple lines of code. I suppose I could get fancier. Let's uncomment just 10 and 11 for starters. All right, so this is interesting. If we run this, we're making a temporal.date. Remember I talked about there's a whole bunch of types in this library, but the date type is intended to represent just a date without a time or a related time zone.
Yeah.
So by having that date object that represents just a date, that behavior you said, I usually want the local time. When you parse it in, you're guaranteed to get it back out without any time zone shifting.
Yeah.
You think it might be bad that the time zone's not there, but it's actually great. The time zone's not there. You're going to get the string you passed in. So then if we take the next 3 lines, say you want UTC.
Should I go to comment these back out?
I mean, you'll just get extra outputs, however you want to do it.
Well, for the sake of the reader.
Yep. If you actually want UTC, this is amazing. We create an absolute for right now, and then we come and we get back the epoch seconds. We can also output that in ISO 8601. That's the 2020-01-01 format. And then this is cool. This is a little thing. Our current date object only supports down to millisecond precision. But a really great language feature landed just when I started making this proposal, and we see it on display right here. Big integer. There is a 64-bit integer right there. Actually, big integer is a floating precision integer, but that allows us to get down to microsecond precision. I will call out only if the host or OS supports it.
Okay.
Right? Like, if the OS doesn't support it, then we can't do anything. But if the OS supports it, we can get all the way down to microsecond precision, which was really critical for a lot of scientific applications, and we heard that many times over.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you work at NASA or you're launching rockets with JavaScript, microseconds matters.
We have performance teams on the cloud for whom that's a thing. So there's stuff out there. Let's see. So yeah, we can do this one. So this illustrates a major problem that we heard complaints over and over again with the old way date works, which is that there's a couple problems going on here. If I want to add a day, you see me parsing 2020 January 1st. Say I want to get January 2nd.
Yeah.
First of all, there's no add API. You have to set the day, get the day +1.
Yeah.
Which is annoying. But then also, you're mutating the original date. So it's all kind of annoying. Like if you wanted to have the old date and then the new date, you'd have to copy the date and then do the mutation, which is not great. And then this API is just not ergonomic at all.
Yeah.
Now with Moment, if you comment this out and go to the Moment code, we fixed one problem and created another one. And this is where take that last console log too. Take line 31.
Yep.
This is where these sorts of things were big learnings about, like, we have to even move forward from Moment. So you see here, to add one day, we made a very nice API for that adds one day. But we saw all of these transient mutation bugs where people wouldn't realize that they were mutating first of year. When they created next day of year, they didn't realize that they were mutating first of year, and it broke code all over the place.
Ah, because they basically erased the first day.
Yep.
By creating the second day.
Yep.
Interesting.
And so again, you'd have to do a copy, and this is a very gnarly API. Like, you didn't expect that at all.
No, that's quite unfortunate.
Yeah.
Which is why everybody should test stuff in stage 2 and do this.
Yeah. So we knew about this problem. So if we comment these out and we go to right here, line 33, 34, yep, 738. Now we've got a very nice plus days API that leaves that original date intact. So I think this is a big step up in lots of dimensions.
Yeah, I mean, at least it gives you what you're expecting too as well.
Yep, it gives you what you're expecting. So yes.
Yeah, and I would say it's pretty intuitive too as well. Because the before was next day of year. What was the API for that? Oh, next day of year. Oh, sorry, you named it next day of year, but you just added it. Okay.
Yeah. So Moment presented a nice step forward from that. Like, if you go up to the top, what date does is quite unfortunate, where you have to set the date plus the date.
Yeah.
So it fixes both problems.
Okay, excellent.
And then this last demo case, if we want to do it. So this is something that I can't even give you a demo of in the old API because it did not exist. If you're asking yourself, so a common question that I ask myself, I have a close coworker in Shanghai. I talk to him a couple times a week. So a common question that I ask myself all the time is, what time is it in Shanghai? So shout out to Nick in Shanghai. On our partner team. We now, previously, if you wanted to get a time for any time zone other than UTC or where you are in local time, you can get it out of JavaScript. It's not there. There are some weird hackarounds over the Intel libraries you can do, but for the most part, it's not there. This is awesome. There is the time right now for you. And there's the time in Shanghai right now, in case you're wondering whether it's a convenient time to call your coworkers over there.
Excellent. I mean, I would totally. This is like one of those things I just have like in a executable, just waiting for me to just type in Australia and then tell me what Australia's time is right now.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you can Google it, but
I already have the terminal open. But yeah,
I've been known to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that the reason why I did the week number thing is because I used to always Google, what is the current week number? Otherwise, I'd go and count calendar weeks, and be like, oh, it's the third week. But then when you get up to like week 41, then you're like, do I subtract from the last week of the month? And then I can Google it. Actually, can I? Let's see. The current week number. And it was, so that one thing, yeah, so we're in week 34, which is interesting because I just did something that I put week 33 on. But anyway, that's besides the fact.
It has to do with whether you're following the ISO week or a local week. That particular problem is quite complex and it has locality concerns.
Yes.
I'm a total nerd. We won't even go there.
Yeah, and like my use case, I could further explain that because I totally understand that because when we create the week number issue every week, so basically in my team we do instead of doing a weekly stand up or a daily stand up, we do a weekly issue, and in that issue you provide updates and comments asynchronous. So because we know that issue just needs to be open every week, we'll attach the week number, we'll close it on Friday evenings, like West Coast time, West Coast US time. Because that's the last person. I'm the last person in the time zone team. And then on Sunday at 10 a.m. in Australia time, I would open up the new issue on a cron job, because that's when technically it's the week we're all thinking it should be and not the previous week, because then it's finally new Australia, but also in UTC it also is technically the new week then. But yeah, lots of confusion. I wrote so many bugs in this, and it was so simple, this one little thing, and I had to fix it so many times. So I've learned a lot in this process, and I will continue to learn.
Yeah. Well, and with that specific problem of weeks, the ISO specification, I keep saying ISO, so if people haven't, like sort of internalized it, ISO 8601 is a specification for date formats and things like that most modern computing uses. But the ISO specification will give you ISO weeks, but also like some places consider Monday the start of the week, some places consider Sunday the start of the week. If you're in Israel, then you're having Saturday as the start of the week. So it's yeah.
No, it's hard. I once actually was on a plane heading to Brazil for a Python conference, and it was during daylight savings time. And while I was in the air, the president of Brazil decided that they would go ahead and end daylight saving time. So when I landed, it was completely the wrong hour, and everything was very confusing. And even my phone could not catch up because it was also a whole nother SIM card and everything.
If the president of Brazil decided last minute to change his daylight saving time rules, just as a warning, you can't do that, dear heads of government who happen to be listening to the stream, because that underlying time zone database, it's called the IANA time zone database, and like every operating system, your phone, your Windows machine, your Mac, is picking up that underlying data set. And so like we can't ship that fast.
Yes, Y2K all over again. At least we had a head start with Y2K.
Well, it happens all the time, weirdly, that governments give like 1 week notice that they're going to change the way that their time zones behave, and then they do just end up with broken computer clocks. I have noticed that world governments in the last few years have sort of picked up on the fact that this is problematic, and a lot of them have learned to like, the time zone database itself is like an open source project. You can email the time zone database and say, I need a change to how the time works.
Ooh, man, I would hate to be a maintainer there.
My husband is.
Oh, really? Oh, well, bless him. That is awesome. I was not expecting that. But also, of course, you have so much unique information about the time zone database, which we should definitely have him on, because I'm intrigued of what that looks like.
It's not quite the same thing as maintainer in the way we talk about it in open source, but Matt is a contributor to the time zone database.
Excellent. Is that the same people who manage finding out where Santa Claus is throughout the Christmas Eve?
No, that's NORAD. That's somewhat different.
Okay. Excellent. Confusion all around. Yeah, so excellent. Yeah, I appreciate you walking through this. I'm just out of curiosity. Can we just check out real quick how I'd find the week number, if that would be a cool thing we could explore?
Yeah, okay, like I said, the guys were changing the APIs. So I gotta go in the docs and see if they have it in here. Week number, swear, give yearly occurrence, nth weekday of the month, weekday of yearly, day of week. See, I don't even have my own things. There should be an ISO.
No worries if it moved around. I can also definitely give it a look. If I were to look for it, would it be in the cookbook?
Probably. Okay, I don't think we have it in right now. I should raise an issue on that. I know we had an open issue at one point on it, but I don't think we have it in right now. I actually, you have given me an issue to raise.
Okay. If you want to mention me on that, I'd be happy to explore it. But yeah, excellent. Yeah, no worries if it's not there. It's something that's on top of mind for me just because I have this trivial example, and I'd love to have a nice little node script to run every time I want to find out the week number in my current time zone.
Yeah, let me, I will raise that. They might have decided that they wanted to pull it over to 402. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Because the concept definitely, like the ISO week exists. So, you know, it may be that it's a string formatter where you output the ISO week. I will find this for you. We will make this happen.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to it. And yeah, so curious, actually, I just realized why. I've just noticed that the Zoom is like broken a little bit, and I realized it's because the chat was open this entire time. But anyway, sorry, just super distracted on trying to manage the stream and have a conversation at the same time. But we're actually pretty close to time too as well. I'm curious if anybody in the chat, if you have any questions about this, feel free to drop them in. I appreciate Python coming through and chatting about this with us, and a few other people too as well dropped in kind of some aha wow moments as well. Also appreciate the follows too, everybody. We're planning on doing this pretty much every week on Fridays, starting next month. So we've done a couple pilots and trying to figure out the system and how to like get people online and talk on Twitch, because Twitch was new for me, to be quite honest. And but Maggie, this was a great conversation.
All right, well, thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead.
I always have fun with dates.
Yeah.
It's a good space.
Yeah, it's a cool space to nerd out in. I think my first job in San Francisco as an engineer, it was a scheduling. It was a boot camp, but I worked on the actual the online platform for the boot camp students because it was remote based, and we had to do scheduling for mentors and students together, and that problem was like enough for me to be like, man, this is a challenging problem, because I think at the same time we had this weird time zone. We call them disjunctures. I don't know if that's a proper term, but in our code base we call them disjunctures, and it's basically the difference between daylight savings time between different countries, and we had to create different disjunctures from all different time zones, because we very regularly, like, we actually, Israel was one of the places we had a lot of mentors and students, but if you had a mentor in London who had a student in Israel, then you had to create this disjuncture to make sure if you booked the time to meet with each other during this disjuncture time, that we could adjust it by the time the meeting happened.
You're talking about how Europe flips DST 3 weeks differently than we do.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if there's official like terms for the difference between those. The differences are reflected in the IANA time zone data, and you can get it out of the time zone APIs in this API.
Yeah. Yeah, but you have a scary amount of knowledge on this subject.
My husband is now looking. He's next to me, and I see him looking for your week numbers. Like, where did it go?
Amazing. Excellent. Well, for the sake of the listener, we're going to go ahead and end the stream. Appreciate everybody hitting the follow button. Definitely check us out for other streams. We've been doing some learning with Cynthia, where Cynthia's in our training team and talking about how to use GitHub and use some basic features, but also some advanced features. And then we've been doing some, over our enterprise channel, we've been doing enterprise level explanations with GitHub Enterprise Cloud. So if you're into that, definitely check out that Twitch stream. And I'm BWO on Twitter and on Twitch. Maggie, you're Maggie Pint, is that correct? Pretty much everywhere?
Yep.
Yeah, so feel free to give us a follow. And if you have further questions, you know the repos to go into now. So good luck. All right, y'all. See ya.